So hey everyone, I'm Arun here, and today I'm gonna show you how to make a pop song like Lauv, Lany, Conan, and Daya. And the track is one of my client songs which will be released in May. And yeah, if you want to support me on Patreon, the link is down in the description below. And many of you asked me for a detailed tutorial, so here I am. So yeah, let's get straight into it. Okay, so the track is arranged something like a verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse 2, pre-chorus 2, chorus 2, and a bridge and the last chorus. So I will go through one by one, and I'll try to explain all the elements that I use. So the first main element in the whole track is this pluck arp. It is made of two layers. The sounds are from Omnisphere. So without any effects, these sound something like this. So in the processing chain, I added an EQ, and uh, I reduced some frequencies, some muddy frequencies which were overboard, and usually I use a narrow Q to cut down frequencies and a wider Q to boost frequencies, as you can see here. So I have these narrow cuts at these frequencies and a high boost at 1.5K. So the next plugin I added is this plugin called RC Retro Color, and I chose a preset called Retro Game Stereo, and I switched off the noise, and I just wanted this digital bit crusher effect, and it sounds something like this. So the next thing is saturation, and black box analog design is one of my favorite plugins to use, and I pretty much went high with the saturation here. So the second last plugin is Grow Speed. I have chosen the sidechain preset so that it sidechains at every fourth beat. So you have to add some movement in your mixes so that it sounds interesting to other listeners. So the last thing is this Fruity Limiter. This is again a sidechain plugin which is used to duck the volume of the arp whenever the kick hits. So I have pretty much adjusted the threshold and the knee to my taste, and I have kept the ratio, attack, release, and sustain as default. So this is my reverb chain. I used a Valhalla vintage verb, and since I was going for a modern retro pop song, I chose the color as new. So next is Parametric EQ, and I rolled off some low frequencies and high frequencies ranging from 400 to 4000 hertz. Following the EQ comes multiband compression. It's just to tame the reverb and so that it doesn't go overboard in the mix. And the last thing is another saturation plugin. So the next thing in the verse is this guitar, which was recorded by my client, and he sent 2 takes of them. I panned it one to the left and one to the right to give it some stereo separation. Without any effects, it sounds something like this. I used a saturation plugin to give some harmonics to the stem. And I also EQ'd the guitar in such a way that it sounds a bit laid back in the mix. I didn't want it to dominate, and yeah, it sounds something like this. And again, it's routed to the large reverb here. And all together, both the arp and the guitar sound something like this. So the next element that comes along is the kick. So without any processing. So one thing to notice is that all of my drum stems are routed to this drum bus, which undergoes parallel compression here and some saturation with decapitator. So the first plugin I used is saturation plugin. So just another EQ to give some air, and I reduce some frequencies at 600 hertz. And I filtered out the kick in such a way that it sounds muffled during the verse and the pre-chorus, and in the chorus section it just opens up. Altogether it sounds something like this. So the next element is a tonal snare, which is again a straight sample. I didn't process it at all, except the fact that I have routed this to a reverb, and it's also in turn routed to a snare bus. I think in snare bus I used a saturation plugin, and that's it. So altogether it sounds something like this. So I use these hits also just to refreshen the ears of the listener and use it as a percussion slash fill. Without any processing, it sounds something like this. And I applied some fast distortion, but also reducing the intensity from here. I used a pan man just to pan it left and right, and quite a huge amount of reverb too. Yeah, so the next element is this vocal chop. The vocal chop without any processing sounds something like this. And I used saturation like quite heavily. I used some fruity delay here. And also lastly I used an EQ just to filter out some frequencies which I don't need, especially the highs. And quite a huge amount of reverb done parallelly. And all together. So the following element is this atmosphere one note, which is like like a compilation of many atmosphere notes together. I haven't processed it much, except the fact that I have just panned all of them left and right so as to give some stereo width. And also I use some ambient noise. It's like a paper sample or something. I think using these elements just adds character to the whole song. Next are some one shots, and I haven't processed it even a bit. It's just straight going to the reverb, and that's it. So we have these collection of samples which just fills up the space in the mix, and one of them is this tab. And I also use this pretty strike, which is again a Kashmir sample. And this chime. And all together. So that's it for the verse one, and we are gonna hop into the pre-chorus section. This pre-chorus section consists of some extra elements, one of them being this moon bass. So without any processing, it sounds something like this. Some distortion. And fruity remitter, so whenever the kick hits, it ducks its sound. And this parametric EQ, which again filters it up, and it just opens up throughout the whole pre-chorus. So all together. So the next element that I added is this one note, and it's again a raw sample. I haven't processed it heavily, and it sounds something like this. And next is this Racy Bass, which is like a sound used by Flume a lot, and it's quite heavily processed, and I have used it as an effect and not as a main element, and it sounds something like this without any effects. I added some EQ just to roll out the low end. And the second thing I used is some distortion. I also automated the volume of the whole bass, and again I used a parametric EQ, I think is, yeah, so it just opens up from the mids to the high frequencies. I also sidechained to the kick so that whenever the kick hits, the volume of the bass is dug. So altogether it sounds something like this. So now we have some risers coming up. These are like a collection of risers, panned a little bit left and right. These are straight samples and no processing at all. And we have that same hit down there, which we used earlier, just before the chorus hits. And now let's get into the chorus section. The same plug carbs are going through the chorus too, but I also added another layer of plug carb. No processing at all, it's just routed to the plug carb bus, and we have all the effects that I mentioned before. And I have this stem called Vibey plug. It sounds really retro-ish, and yeah, without any processing it sounds something like this. And I use this plugin called RC Retro Color again just to give some fluctuation in the frequencies. and some reverb. And all together. And the same moon bass is continuing throughout the whole chorus, but this time it's open. And we have the kick, but the kick pattern is pretty different from the verse. And we have these snares coming up. There are 4 layers of snare here. And all together it sounds something like this. I also coupled them with a few hi-hats and they sound something like this. And I rolled out some low frequencies which were not needed. Little alter boy just to fluctuate the formant and just give some moment. And some distortion. See how it brings life to the whole hats, you know. And the last thing is fruity limiter. So the fruity limiter is again the plugin used for ducking the volume of the hi-hats whenever the kick hits. So altogether it sounds something like this. And added some reverb. So the next element is our bass, which is an 808, and it sounds something like this. Without any effects. So I used the parametric EQ just to roll out frequencies before 35 Hz. Human ears barely can hear 35 Hz. And some distortion. So again, the fruity limiter acts as a sidechain so that whenever the kick hits, the 808 reduces its volume. Yeah, so we have these 808 runs here, and these are the same 808s, but I drew a melody 1 octave high, and these are like counter melodies. So again, I use the parametric EQ just to remove low end, because these are a part of 808s, but they don't contribute the bass here. And some fruity fast distortion and a bit of stereo shaping. All together, it sounds something like this. So I added this small vocal chop in between so as to give some variation and just to sound something different from the verse. So we have this fill right here, which is again a tom sample, and it's undergoing some high distortion and some reverb in parallel. So these acts like a fill in between the chorus. And yeah, let's get into the stabs now, which contributes the mids of this whole section. And this is the first vibey guitar stab. This is like a guitar sample. Some EQing just to roll off the low frequencies, some distortion, and some EQing just to remove some frequencies from 400 to 600 hertz, and a long reverb here. And the second is this electric pluck, which really sounds out of the context in itself, but with the mix it just fills up the space. So yeah, also like all of my stabs are routed onto this stab bus, which has this FabFilter Pro Q, which just rolls off some frequencies, and again the saturation plugin and the fruity limiter, so that whenever the kick comes in, it just ducks its volume. So we have this electric guitar, which is like a sample which I pitched up and down so that it sounds exactly like my chord progression. So without any effects. I added this sidechain so that it just sounds more interesting to the ears. So the next thing is this stab, which is like 4 layers of stabs together. Okay, so there are like 5 layers, sorry, my bad. And I have added a reverb in parallel. And it is routed to the stab bus too. Yeah, so I have sidechained this stab so that obviously it just sounds a bit more pleasant to the ears. Now we have this melodic stab going on, which is like one of the main elements and one of my favorite sounds too. Yeah, and I added some reverb in parallel to it, and that's it. So all together it sounds something like this. My bad for all the CPU problems here. but hope you got the gist of it. And let's get into the other parts. And the same atmosphere, one note is going out throughout the whole chorus. And the same ambience, the one shot plug. And I have added these impacts so that there's like an extra punch when the chorus hits, and they are not processed at all, they're just straight samples. Yeah, so we have these reverse transition and weird plug going on. So these are just straight samples, no processing at all, just pan left and right, and that's it. And the last effect we have is this shouting effect. I think it's like an animal shouting sample. I used like a distortion plugin, an EQ just to roll off low frequencies, an EQ just to boost high frequencies, and a delay plugin. And I added a huge reverb, and this time the sample is routed straight to the reverb large. Yeah, so basically that's about the chorus, and it sounds something like this. So let's get into the verse 2. So the verse 2 contains the same elements as verse 1, except the fact that I removed the guitar one, and also the snare is processed a little bit differently than usual. So on every even note of the snare, I have added a delay. And altogether it sounds something like this. Pre-chorus and the chorus are exactly the same as the first ones. Now we get on to the bridge. I reversed this riser. I panned it hard left, and during the second hit I panned it hard right. And also I added a new sample which is like the sweep down effect. So this sound is called the trance plug, and this is from a plugin called Polysix, which is like an analog emulation. So some parametric EQ. And compressor. Saturation. Pan man, so as to give some automatic panning. And stereo shaper just to give some stereo width. And the last plugin is this plugin called RC Retro Color. And some reverb in parallel. So altogether it sounds something like this. So that's it for making a song in the style of those artists that I mentioned before. And thank you for watching till the end. I hope it helped. And if you have any questions, just write it down below. I'll be more than happy to help you. And yeah, stay safe.